Tonight's story is a real-life horror experience that comes from the northeastern United States. It involves a quiet country road, an old farmhouse, and a terrifying presence that's haunted one man's life ever since. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and prepare yourself for a story that might just keep you awake tonight. In 2014, Nathan, a 26-year-old graduate student, moved into an old farmhouse in upstate New York. He had found the place through a friend of a friend who told him the rent was dirt cheap. The catch? It was located on a long, isolated road called Black Hollow Road, a place that already carried a strange reputation with the locals. The farmhouse wasn't run down. It was spacious and charming in a rustic way. High ceilings, creaking wooden floors, and wide-open fields that stretched endlessly around it. But from the first moment Nathan stepped inside, something felt off. The air was thick, and it felt like he was being watched. The landlord had been quick during the walkthrough. When Nathan asked if anyone had lived there recently, the man avoided eye contact and simply said, "It's been empty for a while. Just take care of the place." Nathan brushed it off, excited to have the privacy and the space to focus on his graduate research. But it only took less than a week for things to start happening. On the third night, Nathan woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps above his room. He froze in his bed. The farmhouse attic was right above him. At first, he told himself it had to be animals, maybe raccoons or squirrels. But the footsteps were deliberate, slow, and heavy. They moved from one side of the attic to the other and then stopped. Nathan stayed awake until dawn, staring up at the ceiling, waiting to hear them again. When the morning came, he mustered the courage to check the attic. He pulled down the wooden ladder, climbed up, and pushed his head through the hatch. The attic was empty. No furniture, no storage, no signs of pests. Just dust and a few broken floorboards. And yet, in the dusty wooden planks, he noticed something disturbing. Footprints. Bare human footprints, imprinted in the dust, circling the attic space. But what unsettled him more was that the footprints didn't lead to the hatch. They simply stopped in the middle of the attic, as though whatever made them had vanished into thin air. From then on, things escalated. Doors would creak open by themselves. The front porch light flickered every night at the exact same time, and Nathan began waking up at precisely 3 a.m., without fail, to the sound of breathing, slow, strained breathing just outside his bedroom door. One night, too frightened to open the door, Nathan decided to record on his phone. He slid the device on the floor to capture audio and left it recording overnight. The next morning, he pressed play. What he heard made his skin crawl. Hours of silence, punctuated by faint footsteps, a dragging sound, and then a whisper. A woman's voice, barely audible. It said, "Let me in." That was the first night Nathan considered leaving the farmhouse. But financially, he was stuck. He told himself he'd stick it out a little longer, that maybe all of this had an explanation. But deep down, he knew he wasn't alone in that house. It was late November when the most terrifying encounter happened. Nathan was driving back to the farmhouse at around midnight after visiting a friend in the nearby town. Black Hollow Road was deserted, with no houses for miles, just woods pressing against the sides of the pavement. As his headlights cut through the darkness, Nathan saw something ahead, a figure standing in the middle of the road. He slammed on the brakes, his tires screeching. The figure didn't flinch. It was a woman. Her hair hung down in front of her face, tangled and wild. She wore what looked like a torn hospital gown, and her skin was unnaturally pale, almost bluish. Nathan sat frozen behind the wheel. The woman slowly tilted her head upward, and though the hair partially hid her face, what he saw made his stomach drop. Her eyes were completely black, endless voids that seemed to pull the light right out of the night. Then, without warning, She lifted her arms and sprinted toward the car. Nathan screamed and hit the gas, swerving around her and speeding down the road as fast as his car could go. He didn't look back. He couldn't. When he pulled into the driveway of the farmhouse minutes later, shaken and sweating, he sprinted inside and locked every door. But as he stumbled into his bedroom and looked out the front window, his heart almost stopped. There she was, the same woman, standing at the edge of his driveway, staring at the house. He yanked the curtains shut and didn't sleep that night. For the next several days, Nathan barely left his bedroom at night. He ate, studied, and filmed himself to try to make sense of everything. But then something new happened, something worse. He woke up around, once again, 3 a.m. to the sound of the wooden attic door creaking open. Except this time, it wasn't above his room. It was inside his room. When Nathan flicked on his lamp, he froze. The attic ladder had been pulled down, just feet away from his bed. He had not touched it. He had not opened it. And as he stared in horror, he swore he heard something still moving above him in the attic. Slow, skittering movement, as if someone was crawling upside down along the beams. Nathan grabbed his phone to call anyone. But before he could, his lamp flickered and went out. His room plunged into darkness. The only sound was the soft thud of someone or something dropping down from the attic. For Nathan, that was the breaking point. He called his friend Derek the next morning and begged him to come over and help him move out. Derek agreed, though skeptical about the haunting claims. By that evening, the two of them were boxing up Nathan's things. Nathan felt immense relief, certain he was going to leave the nightmare behind. But as 3 a.m. drew closer, Derek, now staying the night, began to admit something felt wrong. The air had grown freezing, their breath now visible, even though the furnace was running. The house vibrated faintly, like something was growling deep in the foundation. And then it came. The footsteps echoed across the attic. Both men froze, listening. Slowly, the creaking moved across the ceiling, then down the stairs. Derek whispered, "There's someone else in here." The footsteps stopped. Then, from the kitchen, came the sound of silverware clattering to the floor. Derek grabbed a fireplace poker, and Nathan picked up a flashlight, both shaking. They slowly made their way to the kitchen. Nothing. But as they turned to head back upstairs, they both froze. In the hallway, by the front door, stood the woman, her head tilted, the torn gown hanging off her frail body. Her mouth opened slowly, unnaturally wide, and the same whisper filled the air. "Let me in," Derek shouted in terror, swinging the poker wildly. But the woman didn't move. Instead, the front door behind her blew violently open, slamming against the wall with a deafening crack. The wind howled through the hall, and the woman vanished. But in that moment, Nathan's phone, which he had been recording with, captured something chilling. A faint voice, not from the woman, but from directly behind them. It whispered, "You already did." Nathan and Derek fled the farmhouse that night and never returned. Nathan broke his lease, paid the penalties, and moved into a small apartment in a crowded city, far from rural isolation. But the haunting never really left him. Weeks later, in his new place, Nathan tried to sleep only to wake up at 3 a.m. again. His phone buzzed randomly at that hour, showing missed calls from a blocked number. Sometimes, when he played back the voicemails, all he heard was that same strained breathing. To this day, Nathan refuses to drive down Black Hollow Road, and when asked about it, he simply says, "I made a mistake. I never should have opened the attic door." So, what do you think was going on in that farmhouse on Black Hollow Road? Was it a spirit tied to the land? Something demonic that latched onto Nathan? Or maybe something even darker, waiting for its next victim to pass by? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit like. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. or your own chilling experiences. And make sure to subscribe for more true horror stories, because the next terrifying encounter could be yours. This is a true horror experience told by someone who swears it happened to them. It took place late last summer, deep in the forests of northern Maine, at a small and forgotten lakeside resort. There's something almost comforting about long drives into nature. Pine trees roll endlessly on either side. The air gets crisper and the outside world feels far away. That's exactly what Aaron and his 3 friends wanted when they set out for a weekend trip. The resort wasn't new. In fact, it was barely holding together 5 small wooden cabins lined up near a quiet lake, their paint peeling from years of neglect. They were assigned cabin number 6, the last one in the row, furthest from the office and closest to the woods. The owner, an elderly man with sunken cheeks and pale eyes, handed them the key without much of a word. He only said, "Don't go into the woods at night. Things wander here." The group laughed it off. It just sounded like a trick to scare city kids. But Aaron remembered the way the man's hand shivered when he placed the key in his palm. The warning didn't feel like a joke at all. That night, after a bonfire by the lake, Aaron went back inside the cabin early, while the others stayed out drinking. The old cabin creaked with every movement. The air inside was heavy, stale, almost metallic. As he tried to sleep, he heard something. A scratch, long and deliberate, against the far side of the cabin wall. At first, he thought it must be a tree branch, but there were no trees close enough. The scratching grew louder until it turned into tapping, slow, steady taps. Then, a deep dragging sound, as though something was circling the cabin. He told himself it was probably an animal, but when he glanced toward the window, he froze. A pale, skeletal face was pressed against the glass. Hollow sockets stared directly in at him. When he screamed, his friends came running inside, but the window was empty. No footprints, no marks, not a trace of anything at all. The next day, shaken but unwilling to admit how afraid they were, the group went hiking. One of his friends, Dylan, brought up cabin 6. Apparently, he overheard the resort owner's wife saying that nobody ever asked for cabin 6 anymore. Most guests refused to stay there after one night. Some had left in the middle of the dark without checking out, leaving all their belongings behind. That night, Aaron decided to stay awake. If there really was something outside, he wanted to catch it. His friends dozed off one by one until only the faint sound of breathing filled the cabin. At exactly 3 a.m., he heard it again. The scratching this time, at the door. The handle started to shake violently, the sound of wood cracking under stress. He watched in horror as the old metal lock trembled. Suddenly, it stopped. The silence lasted only seconds before a voice whispered through the door. A woman's voice. It said, "Please, let me in." Aaron's heart dropped. The voice was ragged, desperate, and full of something not quite human. The next morning, while everyone loaded into the car to go into town, Aaron approached the resort owner. He demanded answers. The old man stared at the ground and said, "Cabin 6 hasn't been right for years. A couple stayed there back in the 80s. Newlyweds. They went into the woods one night, never came out. Search teams found nothing but scraps of clothing near the lake. Some say they drowned, but locals don't believe that. Around here, we know their spirits linger, wandering. She knocks, asking to be let in. And if you answer, you don't come back." Against his better judgment, Aaron agreed to stay the final night. His friends brushed it off, as ghost stories meant to keep people entertained. But Aaron knew better. Everything was fine until 2:57 a.m. Then the tapping began again. This time, it wasn't just one voice. Multiple whispers called from outside, men and women together, overlapping. Some begged, some screamed, some laughed in a shrill and broken way. Shadows shifted outside every window, hands, faces, broken forms pressing against the glass. And then, the door creaked open. His friend Dylan had gotten up in a half-asleep daze and unlatched it, thinking it was one of them outside. The moment the door opened, the whispers exploded into a horrifying chorus. Figures poured in dark, half-formed silhouettes with faces stretched too long, arms too thin, eyes nothing but pits. They rushed the cabin, their screams tearing through the air. Aaron swears he doesn't remember what happened next. He blacked out. When he woke up, morning light streamed through the cracks in the wooden walls. The door was closed and everything looked normal. But one thing was wrong. Dylan was gone. No sign of where he went, no footsteps, no broken branches in the woods. It was as if he had never been there at all. When they confronted the resort owner, all he said was this: "Cabin 6 takes who it wants. Be grateful it wasn't you." They left without another word, dragging their luggage into the car, terrified to look back. To this day, Dylan has never been found. His name isn't in missing person reports, because when his parents called the police, they claimed there was never a record of him renting the cabin or even checking into the resort that weekend. It's almost like Cabin 6 erased him from the world entirely. That was the story of Cabin 6, a place that still stands today, rotting slowly in the woods of northern Maine. The cabins were shut down soon after Aaron's trip. Locals say you can still find them if you're willing to hike far enough, though most people who try don't spend long near Cabin 6. They say at night, you can see the reflection of a pale face in its window. And if you're unlucky, you'll hear that voice whisper through the door, "Please, let me in." If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more true horror experiences told just like this one. Hi everyone. Before I start, remember to hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe for more real-life horror stories. This is the story of the scariest week of my life. I used to think people exaggerated when they said they'd never be the same after a paranormal encounter. I used to laugh off ghost stories, convinced they were just campfire tales and wild imaginations. That changed forever one August, 3 years ago, in the woods, outside Vermont. I was 26. At the time, I was working remotely, looking for peace and quiet to finish a freelance project. A friend, Ben, tipped me off about a cheap rental, an old caretaker's house on the edge of a forgotten resort, on a lake surrounded by miles of pine forest. From the moment I drove up, the creepiness was unavoidable. The house was small, built in the late 1800s, with flaking paint and a porch sagging under its own weight. The nearest neighbor lived half a mile down the road. But what made the place instantly unsettling was the dense patch of woods just behind the house. Every time the wind picked up, the trees seemed to whisper together, strange, high-pitched noises that almost sounded like words. I shrugged it off, chalked it up to wind and branches. Unpacking that first night, I found scratches on the floor near my bed. 5 deep gouges, as if someone had dragged something heavy. I figured it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or even an old dog. When I lay down, the house creaked and shifted, settling into the night. At exactly 2:15 a.m., a series of thuds woke me from a dream. They sounded like footsteps, muffled, deliberate, out in the hallway. But I was alone. Heart pounding, I turned on my phone's flashlight and crept out. The hallway was empty. I nearly convinced myself I'd imagined it, but the footsteps continued downstairs. This time, softer, dragging across the creaky old floorboards. I barged into the kitchen. No one. Nothing. I locked every door and tried to sleep. But every hour, I kept waking up to faint noises. Scratching, knocking, a whisper that almost sounded like my name. The next morning, I met the only neighbor, an old woman named Mrs. Romano. She warned me to keep my doors locked at night and not to wander the woods after dark. She refused to explain why, only muttering, "There are things that don't want to be seen." That afternoon, I went hiking with Ben. In the late afternoon, we found a clearing full of ancient, crooked trees and a half-buried stone well. The well was covered by a rusted metal grate. Surrounding it, I noticed strange symbols carved into the rocks. Ben joked they were probably witchcraft. But then he saw something that made us both freeze. From the shadows beyond the well, a moving shape flickered between the trees. I only caught a glimpse. Tall, impossibly thin, dark as a shadow, with long arms that hung almost to the ground, and a face that was all darkness, save for two glinting pinpricks where its eyes should be. I told Ben I'd probably seen a deer. He didn't believe me. Back at the house, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The wind outside carried those same murmuring sounds. At midnight, as I was brushing my teeth, I looked up into the mirror and nearly dropped my toothbrush. Behind me, over my shoulder, was a blurred reflection. Not my own. Pale and warped, mouth stretched into a scream. When I spun around, I was alone. I tried to brush it off as fatigue and stress, but the rest of the night, footsteps echoed through my hallway. I heard breathing, close, deliberate, outside my closed bedroom door. I was sleeping fitfully when I jolted awake. Loud banging, as if someone was pounding the porch steps. I grabbed the baseball bat from under my bed. Cautiously, I crept into the living room. The banging stopped. In the suffocating silence, I realized the air was freezing cold, colder than it had ever felt inside. From the back of the house, I heard whispering, a sound like dozens of voices talking at once, overlapping, repeating my name. I snapped my head around, shining a flashlight straight into the kitchen. That's when I saw it, clear as day, pressed against the glass of the back door. A face, smooth and pale, stretched impossibly thin. Its mouth twisted into a grin full of needle-sharp teeth. Eyes sunken, pure black pits. It didn't blink. I screamed for Ben, but he wasn't there. As I watched, more faces appeared in the window, as if shadows were leaning out of the woods, eager to get in. I slammed the deadbolt shut, shaking. By now, I was terrified to sleep. I called Ben, but his phone rang endlessly. Texts went unreturned. I tried Mrs. Romano's house, but got no response. That afternoon, I found Ben's car parked crooked by the edge of the woods, door ajar, keys still in the ignition, but no sign of Ben. On the hood was a single word scrawled in the dust: "Run." I tried the police. They didn't sound surprised when I described the area. "We'll send a patrol out tomorrow," was all they promised. That night, I barricaded every window, stacked furniture against the doors, left every light on. At exactly 3:07 a.m., every bulb in the house flickered out at once. The temperature dropped. My breath hung in the air. There was a scratching sound, slow, deliberate, moving all around the house. Panic seized me as I heard my name, whispered in chorus, louder and louder, searching for something, anything, to use as light. I stumbled onto the basement door. A sick feeling twisted my stomach, but I remembered Mrs. Romano's warning about locked doors. In the pitch dark, I crept down the narrow steps, phone flashlight shaking in my hand. That's when the voices started. Not from outside, from inside. They echoed from somewhere deep in the ground, inside the walls themselves. The scratching grew frantic. Then, with a sudden burst, my phone's light flickered and illuminated a wall covered in symbols. In the center, a huge, fresh gouge slashed through the plaster, as though something massive had tried to break through. Just as I approached, the wall started to bulge outward, the drywall stretching, groaning, as if something inside was desperate to escape. A hand burst through, unnaturally long, bony, covered in gnarled gray skin. I sprinted upstairs and jammed the door shut, desperately trying not to pass out from fear. I barely slept. The next night, the woods outside were alive with movement. I could see shadowy figures pacing between the trees, eyes reflecting white whenever my flashlight brushed past. They surrounded the house. Suffocating dread pressed down on me. That evening, the knocking returned, but louder, more demanding, from every door and window at once. I heard Ben's voice calling out, pleading for help. I stared at the front door, nauseated because I knew Ben had vanished. I forced myself not to open it. That was when a shape moved in the hallway, a shadow twisting and elongating, growing until it touched the ceiling, whispering my name in hundreds of overlapping voices. Its hands reached for me. I bolted for the only place left, the car. I didn't bother packing. I sprinted straight outside, ignoring the shadows slithering all around the house. As I unlocked the car, cold hands grabbed my arm. I spun around, but nobody was there. The whispering rose to an unbearable pitch, echoing in my ears, seeping into my thoughts. I slammed the door and gunned the engine. As I sped off, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Behind me, the woods teemed with twisted shapes, rising out of the ground, watching as I left. I didn't look back until sunrise, when I saw the caretaker's house growing smaller in my mirrors, the woods quiet once again. Ben was never found. After the police eventually searched the property, they told me there was no sign of him, or anyone for that matter. The woods were clear, the old well untouched, the basement clean. I moved back to the city and haven't spent a night alone in the countryside since. The nightmares didn't stop for months. Some nights, I still wake to hear scratching at my door, faint whispers through my window. But the worst part? Sometimes, I see a reflection in the glass. A face, stretched and pale, mouth frozen into a grin full of needle-sharp teeth, watching, waiting, whispering my name. And I know deep down, whatever haunted those woods, whatever shadows walked behind that house, they never really let me leave. They followed me home. If you found this story terrifying, be sure to smash like, drop a comment about your own paranormal experiences, and subscribe for new horror stories every single week. Stay safe, and remember, never answer when the shadows call your name.